children of Balestier SDA Church. I remember my church is a good, sociable, good-to-learn church. The beautiful building and nice people, the people who loved me. I remember the times when I would sing praises for the Lord, reading the Bible in Sabbath school, and praying in kids' church. I remember taking part in the 13th Sabbath program. I was proud. I remember adventurers club activities. We always had fun. I remember the pastors and the children's stories. The pastor stories were very interesting. I remember preaching in church for the first time. I felt really nervous and excited at the same time. I remember playing on the swing after church, going camping and having fun on social nights at the back of the church, playing volleyball and badminton. I remember going to children's convention at Changi, makan time with Uncle Chin, and the time I went shut-in visitation with my friends in Uncle Himsa's car or Uncle Eddie's van. I remember my friends here and will never forget them when I have to leave Singapore. Our memories of Balestier SDA Church. Children's Day, Kids Church, Children's Sabbath, Junior Choir, visitations, social night, and makan time. The times we had here, the times we laughed, smiled, and cried. But the most important thing I remember is that I grew up here in church together with my friends.
It's time for the old people now. Well, we are here because of an invitation from a longtime friend, Calvin Lim. We knew Calvin here in the 70s, and Krogstad and us they went to permanent return, and Mabel and I went on furlough. Calvin, we were all at Andrews University going to graduate school. So we got really quite well acquainted with Calvin there at Andrews University. And when this event got on the schedule, he remembered his old schoolmates. And so thanks a lot for inviting us, Calvin. We came here in 1970 the first time, and the second time in 1992. So we were members here of this church for about 10 years. And we remember at that time, the Division family mostly attended the Balestier Road Church. Some went to other places, but we all enjoyed years of worship here at the Balestier Road Church. It was our home church. In fact, when I retired, I had been a member of the Balestier Road Church longer than any other Adventist church in my whole life. But now we've been retired so long that we've been a member a long time. We're members in Placerville, California. That's Hangtown. That's the nickname of the place where we live, at the foothills of the Sierras, not far from Lake Tahoe. Very beautiful place. If you come our way, be sure to stop and see us, because we have some guest rooms. Well, some memories here. Balestier, some good memories we've had. Our son was baptized here in this church a long time ago, and that brings back memories for us. I remember we had a very active Sabbath school class at that time, and we took on a project of providing an aid for our college students in Myanmar once a week. They didn't have enough money to even buy eggs for the students, so we took on that project. We were going to send them enough money so that the college students in Myanmar could have at least one egg every week on the menu. So that was a highlight, being very active in missionary activities. And our Sabbath school class had a project of following up Voice of Prophecy interests. Remember in those years, back in the 70s, the Voice of Prophecy was very strong here. And they had lots of names to give out. And they counted on the Balestier Road Church to visit the people. I remember visiting people for a Voice of Prophecy interest. That was a highlight. I studied with a young man. I still remember that. I had gone to his home and studied a couple times, and he seemed quite interested in the Bible. And so after about a couple studies, I said, "Would you like to pray?" And he looked at me and sort of had this blank look on his face. And I said, "Well, you know what prayer is?" "No," he says, "I don't know what prayer is." I still remember that. So I had to teach him how to pray. Another thing about our young people I remember in those days, we had a lot of youth in the church. And these young people had become Seventh-day Adventists, and they were the only Adventists in their families. Their parents were not the members of the church. They had come in through voice of prophecy and through witnessing. We had a lot of young people in the church. And still remember, we used to say, you know, we had potluck at the Balestier Road Church. There was never even a round-the-pot left. When we got through, those young people had just cleaned up the table. We all got ours first, and then whatever was left over, they took care of, Pastor. And they spent the day here. They spent all Sabbath afternoon here. After the potluck, they would stay and have every meeting, and they would stay here at the church until sundown. Because if they went home, their parents, who were not members of the church, wanted to have them do chores. So they would stay here for the whole Sabbath day. So that sticks out in my memory. I don't know if we still have a lot of young people like that here in the church or not, but that was certainly a wonderful thing to have all those young people with us here on Sabbath. Another thing I remember is one day we were here, and the president of the union, Elder Richards, was his name. And he was going to preach that Sabbath, and the opening song was, "Lord, I care not for riches." And as we were singing, "Lord, I care not for riches," who's the name of the preacher for that day, he just kept looking down. He never looked up and said, "If I looked up, I would have smiled." And they claim that was just by accident or by the Holy Spirit that happened. That we sang that song, "Lord, I care not for riches," but we really didn't care for him. He was our union president. Another thing I remember is we had a lady that came to the church here for a little while, and she sort of had the idea that she was the Holy Spirit. And she would go around the church. And one Sabbath, I remember the pastor was preaching. I don't know if that was you, Pastor. I think you were preaching. She came up and she walked around him to give him a blessing. And he really looked desperate for what to do. But she finally sort of went on. And I still remember that experience and challenged our dear pastor. Well, we had wonderful years here at this church. And when we came here, I almost felt like I was coming to a home church, because when I was at Walla Walla College, 4 young people came from here, the Tons. Some of you remember Margaret and Stephen Ton. They were, my father taught chemistry, and they were taking pre-medicine. And so they were 2 of my father's favorite students studying chemistry back in about the time this church was purchased. And another couple came, where Martin and Maisie Tom came from here. Some of you remember these folk. They were probably some of the first members of this church back in 1951. Martin and I graduated together in 1954 from Walla Walla College. I graduated in theology and he from engineering. So when we came here to join this church, you know, here we had already some friends from college days that were very special. So this church has a lot of fond memories for us, and the people here were so good to us. This really is a very special, wonderful church. Well, I think I've used up my time, Pastor, so I'm going to let my good friend tell you some of his experiences.
Good morning. My wife Donna and I and our 2 little girls, Jeannie and Judy, arrived here in Singapore in early August of 1965. I think that was 46 years ago. And we're privileged to, along with the Shankles, all 4 of our family, be back today to help you celebrate this occasion. And as Clinton mentioned, our longtime friend Calvin Lim was kind of the connector here that told us about this occasion, and our girls remember Singapore as their home. And they were very thrilled to come back. And our eldest daughter, believe it or not, as young as I am, came here to celebrate her 50th birthday a couple days ago. So this has been quite a special occasion for our family. I can remember when we came to Singapore, I think we arrived right at the time that Singapore was becoming independent. And there was a lot of concern that when the British military left, Singapore would just implode and go away. Well, I came this morning to tell you, if you didn't know, that didn't happen. Our experience at Balestier Church was unique in that at that time, as Clinton mentioned, we had a large contingent of missionaries, mostly Americans, here at Balestier Road. There were a couple of Australians and others, but mostly an American group. And the other large contingent was the English-speaking Chinese, and there were several Indians and people from other groups. Well, this was our first encounter with what you would call multicultural living, multicultural worship, and so forth. And that kind of caught my attention. And I want to tell you a couple of stories that I remember at that time. Shortly after we came here, there was a series of Sabbath school lessons about appreciating other cultures. And we met in a class right down here in the first 3 or 4 rows of the sanctuary. And we were about equally divided between Americans and Chinese. And one day, the topic was food. Well, one of the Americans said just could not understand how the Chinese could eat bird's nest soup, that slimy stuff that came out of the bird's mouth. Well, someone else said, you Americans eat eggs, don't you? Yes. Well, they're kind of slimy too, aren't they? Yes. They come out of the other end of the bird too, don't they? Yes. So that was the first story I remember. And Clinton mentioned Martin Ton. He's still a good friend. He lives over there in El Cervante, about 2 hours from where we live. We live also in Placerville, California, near the Shankles. Anyway, Martin Ton was one of these brilliant guys with a great sense of humor and quite a streak of wisdom as well. And about, I think it was in that same series of lessons, he had a special presentation for Sabbath school. And he said some things that shocked us, and maybe some of you have never even heard before. But he was talking about how different groups had nicknames for each other, like the Americans called the British Limeys, and the British called the Americans Yanks, and someone called the Germans Krauts, I believe it was, and the Italians were Wops, and the Japanese were Japs, and he went on with a whole list of these politically incorrect descriptions of people, and ended up by saying that a lot of people called Chinese Chinamen, and I guess that was not politically correct. But the Chinese simply retaliated by calling everyone else foreign devils. And I'll never forget that. And of course, Martin presented that so well, and then made the point that whereas we often think if we put someone else down by an inappropriate name or comment, that we raise ourselves up. He said, no, that doesn't happen. When you put someone else down, you sink with them. When you raise someone else up, you rise with them. A seemingly easy lesson, but one we forget all too often. I must mention also Calvin Lim. Calvin was a bright young lad here at the Balestier Church, played several instruments, including the saw. And I've had a woodworking hobby all of my life, and I was particularly impressed that he could make music on a saw. We just loved it. Anyway, as Clinton has mentioned, Calvin came to the States, and we all attended Andrews University together. And during that time is when we really got acquainted with him. she had no one to lead the music. Well, Calvin was a busy student and, you know, popular and involved in all kinds of stuff, and she thought, well, you know, he just will never make time for doing that. But she asked him finally, and he said, well, sure, I'd just love to do that. So he came over every day and led the music for the Vacation Bible School. And Donna was so impressed and has just loved Calvin ever since. And for the past several days, Calvin has been taking us around and introducing us to a Singapore that we hardly recognize. That's been a great experience. Well, I think I just wanted to say that there's this multiculturalism. One of my big takeaways from Balestier Road Church was the fact that there is strength in diversity. You know, we think that strength comes from unity, and it does in some cases, but there's also strength in diversity, and particularly when that diversity is bound together by common respect and mutual love, as it was and as it is in the Balestier Road Church. So, again, we're so pleased to be here. We congratulate you on 60 years of ministry and of service, and wish you God's richest blessing as you carry on with that ministry and service. Thank you so much.
Besides celebrating the 60th anniversary of our church, this day has added significance to me. It is almost 40 years to the day since I was baptized into membership here. So I was a youth during Elder Clinton's tenure in Balestier. 40 years seems like a long time, almost half a lifetime. But I still remember the early years with great fondness. Allow me to reminisce a little. When I first came to church, I was introduced to youths like Paul Teo, Albert, Vin, Lim Chong, Jeffrey Lin, Lawrence Tan, and then a little later to the Ng siblings, Julie, Rosie, Stephen, Chris, and many, many others. Some still in church here, others elsewhere, and sadly, some have drifted away. It was also here that I first met my then wife, Lee. As we were all first generation SDAs or prospective SDAs, church on Sabbath was a special retreat, a home away from home, as it were. Sabbath mornings would find us gathering in the youth center, the social hall back there, at 9:30, when the youth would conduct the Sabbath school programs and the classes. It was all run by the youth for the youth. Occasionally we would have adult speakers as well. And that's where I learned more about the biblical truths. That's where I learned how to lead out in programs and how to teach. After worship, the format was pretty much the same as we have, we would then gather for lunch in the social hall. We did not have any well-organized potluck as we do today, and only the youths from non-SDA families stayed behind. So lunch was pretty much DIY. The guys and the girls would take turns to prepare lunch on alternate weeks. We would bring our own ingredients, and needless to say, the girls did a much better job of it. Us guys had a very limited repertoire of dishes. We could only do char kway teow, which is the fried flat noodles, and peanut porridge with some value for money fruits like papayas or watermelons. Our cooking skills were so limited that we could also burn our porridge occasionally. But that's where I learned. I had my first hands-on experience in cooking. After lunch and washing up, we would then do door-to-door VOP enrollment. And we would then come back to church around 3:30, 4 o'clock. About 4:30, the girls would gather for Singing Friends, which was an all-girls singing group. At 5:30, it would be MP or AY time. And that would run for about an hour and a half. And then, after sunset, we would adjourn for a short dinner at the back nearby somewhere. And then we'd come back for games. There would be at least 20 people for games. If there was an inter-church, captain ball tournament, the number could swell to 50. Most times we had tally match, we had basketball, we had captain ball, we had soccer, we had volleyball. We'd play to 10 or 10:30 and then call it that's it for the weekend. No, we would come back the next day at 4 o'clock. We'd come back for soccer, we'd come back for volleyball, and then at 6 or 6:30, 6:30 or 7, we would adjourn to Toa Payoh swimming pool, or pool down swim. Here's where I learned to play volleyball, learned to play basketball, and learned how to swim. Otto used to say, whilst others use their weekends to recuperate from the stresses of the weekday, we would use our weekdays to recuperate from the stresses of the weekend. We would also have our annual youth retreat at Port Center. This was for the youth, again planned by the youth for the youth, although we would have chaperones come along. To help fund these retreats, we would do church projects like varnishing the pews. We didn't have nice pews like this in those days. You saw the slide back then. We had wooden pews with woven rattan benches, right? And if you were a bit too heavy or you sat on the wrong one, you could tear and gave a funny noise. So we would take those out on Sunday mornings and varnish those. And that's where we would get our funds for our youth retreat. And that's where I learned to varnish, learned to do project planning, and learned to budget. Then, when we were too old to be youths any longer, we were reluctantly promoted to young adults. But we still came back for Saturday night games, although we had to give more time to the younger ones. That's where I learned to be an uncle. Now, about that time, it was the season of the birds and the bees. Couples started to pair up, wedding bells rung every so often. And here's where I learned about love and marriage. My then girlfriend became my wife, best friend and constant companion. 3 in 1. A very economical and time-saving combination. Then something happened. Our old youth nest started to empty. Some of our old friends went abroad for further studies or to seek greener pastures. And that's where I learned the sadness of parting, and also the joy of knowing that I have friends in far-flung countries. So church has been quite a learning experience for me. Spiritually, physically, socially, and in many other ways. And I'm still learning. So please be patient with me if I seem less than perfect to you. I believe that this is what the good Lord expects of His church. A place to learn and to grow, and to be patient while others learn and grow. As we celebrate our 60th anniversary, let us not forget how faithfully and lovingly the Lord has led us this past 60 years, and do something to contribute to His soon coming as we look forward. Thank you.
lives